Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we are undertaking a deep dive into an absolutely foundational document, born not really of calm academic reflection, but from the searing heat of total systemic failure.
Right. We're talking about the period immediately following the 2007-2009 financial crisis, a time of real chaos.
And the document is the Financial Modeler's Manifesto, penned by two intellectual titans of quantitative finance, Emmanuel Derman and Paul Wilmott.
And the context here really defines the content, doesn't it? This is more than just a critique of bad math. It's an urgent, almost existential confession from the quants themselves, the people who built these models.
Yeah.
The crisis didn't just cause staggering economic loss. It exposed the sheer hubris and, well, fundamental intellectual flaws in how the financial world used its most powerful tool, mathematics.
They saw it firsthand.
They witnessed the collapse of systems that were built on this belief that financial markets behave like some kind of clockwork universe, predictable, tidy.
And the evidence of that failure was terrifying, as they document. They mentioned the specter of illiquidity, right? The credit markets just freezing solid globally.
Completely frozen.
And anomalies that, well, they defied all theoretical understanding. Things that should have been impossible were happening daily, like swap spreads to treasuries.
Ah, yes.
The difference in interest paid on corporate risk versus government risk going negative.
Which sounds technical, but it's fundamentally bizarre.
It's nuts. Now, that is a profound anomaly. For you, the listener, the very idea of a negative swap spread means that the market was basically in a moment of sheer panic.
Total panic.
Valuing the immediate ability to borrow cash, liquidity, so highly that the promise of future risk-free government returns was temporarily worth less than the current cash flow crunch.
It means your basic arbitrage assumptions, the absolute bedrock of how we price things,
Gone.
had completely disintegrated, vanished overnight.
Exactly. Traditional valuation models, which were supposed to be the solid foundation of modern finance and risk management, became utterly useless. Risk managers, looking at billions in unexpected losses, were left just scrambling for excuses.
And they often clung to that tired phrase, didn't they? About once-in-a-century tsunamis.
The black swan event.
But Derman and Wilmott, they knew better. It wasn't just bad luck.
So the mission of this deep dive, really, is to extract the manifesto's central critical message. Why did these mathematically elegant models fail so comprehensively? And crucially, what is the proper role of human intuition, common sense, and ethical responsibility when we apply complex math to these inherently social and behavioral systems?
That's the core question.
So we're kind of looking for a user manual for humility in the age of big data and complex algorithms. Is that fair?
Precisely. That's a great way to put it. For you, the learner, whether you build AI, manage risk, or simply rely on data-driven projections, we are extracting the core, non-negotiable principles for operating where quantitative models meet messy human reality. We are learning how to build and use models without falling into that trap of confusing the mathematical map for the chaotic territory it, purports to describe.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because
Yeah.
the first place Derman and Wilmott point the intellectual finger is not at the execution necessarily,
No.
but at the very inspiration for modern finance,
Yeah.
what they term physics envy.
Ah, physics envy. It's such an essential critique. And it starts really with recognizing the staggering success of physics as a discipline. I mean, it's undeniable.
Absolutely.
Why does physics work with such breathtaking, 10 decimal place accuracy?
Yeah.
Because it operates on fundamental material laws discovered and verified through repeatable experiments. That's the key.
That repeatability, that's the insurmountable barrier for finance, isn't it?
It really is.
Think of it. If Galileo drops a ball today, tomorrow, and 100 years from now, the law of gravity holds. The results, barring external forces, are consistent.
They cite the giant teams in Geneva colliding protons over and over again. It's empirical.
Right. And if a mathematical law contradicts the empirical experiments,
The law is wrong. It gets discarded. Simple as that. The laws of the material universe, they're independent of the observer or the experimenter. They just are.
but then you shift gears, you move
Yeah.
over to finance and economics.
And everything changes. The moment you introduce concepts like monetary value, risk, asset prices, you leave that stable material world behind.
You're in a different realm.
You enter the mental world of monetary value, as they put it. This is where the physics emulation just breaks down utterly.
But finance theory spent decades trying, didn't it? attempting to mimic the style, the elegance of physics.
Oh, absolutely. Searching for those same universal, immutable mathematical laws, the financial equivalent of EMC squared.
But markets are fundamentally non-material. They are made of people.
Exactly. People.
And those people are influenced by this chaotic, interconnected stream of non-quantifiable inputs. Global events, politics, ephemeral feelings about those events.
And crucially, their expectations of other people's feelings. It's inherently self-referential.
It feeds back on itself.
And it's adaptive. If you model the market and the market participants become aware of your model,
Which they do, eventually.
the market changes its behavior in response to the model itself. The model influences the thing it's trying to measure.
So this self-awareness just destroys any hope of finding a simple universal equation, right?
Pretty much. I mean, think about it. If a physics equation predicts a solar eclipse, the sun doesn't suddenly decide to slightly alter its orbit because it read the prediction.
No, of course not.
But if a sophisticated hedge fund models that, say, a particular asset is undervalued and begins buying it aggressively based on that model,
The price moves instantly.
right, the price changes, potentially invalidating the original prediction that sparked the buying. The input changes the output, and the system learns, it adapts, it's alive in a way.
So if the market environment is constantly shifting, constantly adapting, what is the core intellectual concession Derman and Wilmott make here? What's the big takeaway?
It is the devastating punchline of Section 1. It's blunt. The truth is that there are no fundamental laws in finance. And even if there were, there is no way to run repeatable experiments to verify them. Full stop.
Wow, no fundamental laws.
You cannot rewind time to 2007 and maybe just slightly lower the interest rate in Ohio to see if the CDO market would still implode. It's impossible.
Once 2008 has happened, everything's changed.
Everything. The financial environment, the regulations, and most importantly, the collective human fear and behavior, they're permanently altered. Any new model you build now is optimizing for a history that can never, ever be repeated.
That realization, that lack of fundamental laws, leads directly to the core danger they identify, which the manifesto frames using, well, almost religious terminology.
Yeah, the age-old sin of idolatry.
Idolatry. Explain that in this context.
Idolatry here means confusing the model for reality. It's mistaking the map for the territory.
Okay.
Models, the authors state very clearly, are just tools for approximate thinking. Their true, valuable job is to serve as an intuition transformer. That's the phrase they use.
Intuition transformer. I like that.
It takes human, qualitative intuition, guesses about future rates, volatility, market sentiment, and processes that intuition mathematically to output a current quantitative price.
The structure's the guess.
Exactly. The disaster happens when we start to worship the model's output as if it's an oracle, forgetting the flimsy, human-derived inputs that actually started the whole process.
Give me a concrete example of that idolatry in action, say, in the run-up to 2007.
Okay, a classic case is the reliance on value at risk, or VAR models. VAR became like the gold standard for measuring potential loss in banks and trading firms.
Everyone used it.
Everyone. It boiled down a hugely complex portfolio's potential exposure to a single, easy-to-understand number. We have a 99% confidence that we will not lose more than X million dollars over the next trading day. Sounds reassuring, right?
Sounds very precise.
Deceptively precise. The idolatry came when banks and regulators treated this number as gospel truth, believing it actually captured the maximum possible risk.
But the model had limitations, things it didn't see.
Crucially, it had swept under the rug the most important event. The 1% scenario, the systemic, nonlinear collapse that wasn't in the historical data used to build the model.
The thing that actually happened.
The thing that actually happened. When the unthinkable 1% event hit in 2008, the VAR models didn't just fail to predict the magnitude of the loss. They were utterly silent on the mechanism of the collapse, the way things cascade.
So people felt safe because the model said they were safe.
Exactly. People believed the model was the boundary of risk. And that belief allowed them to take on enormous leveraged bets right up to that theoretical model-defined limit. They were driving blind, guided by a faulty map.
It's like the difference between using a map to navigate and believing the map is the physical terrain, including all the dirt, the trees, the changing elevation, the sudden cliff edge.
That's a perfect analogy. And in finance, the terrain, the river, it changes the moment you try to map it. So the manifesto demands humility. It demands recognizing that the very nature of financial data dealing with human expectations, feedback loops, makes that Physics-like precision fundamentally impossible.
Okay, so we've established the intellectual failure, this chasing physics. Now let's get specific. How did this philosophy actually manifest in the products that crashed the system? We need to turn to that quintessential example of confusedly elegant modeling.
Ah, yes.
The models used for collateralized debt obligations, or CDOs.
The CDO models, especially the ones backed by subprime mortgages, they are the absolute poster child for mathematical self-deception. Just textbook examples.
The structural goal of a CDO, though, it sounded kind of elegant on paper, didn't it?
It did. Take thousands of individual risky mortgages, bundle them up, and then slice them into tranches layers of varying risk. You'd have the very safe senior tranches at the top, down to the very risky equity tranches at the bottom.
The idea was to mathematically isolate and sell off the different layers of risk to different investors with different appetites.
Precisely. But the complexity of the inputs here is just staggering, as you said. You're trying to mathematically model the likelihood of default for thousands of individual homeowners.
Spread across multiple states.
Yeah, influenced by local housing prices, regional employment rates, shifting national economic policy. It's a web.
A huge, tangled web.
The complexity is indeed vastly complex, as the manifesto puts it. The initial mathematical attempt to capture all those variables and their intricate relationships, well, it would have resulted in an unusable, non-solvable equation, just intractable.
So the modelers trying to build this fantastical theory that could actually spit out a price.
Which they needed for trading, right?
Yeah, they ran straight into the wall of practical usability. They needed an answer, but they couldn't manage all that dirt, all that real-world complexity.
So the only way to make the model mathematically elegant, solvable, usable was to perform an act of radical reduction.
Simplification.
And this reduction, as the manifesto highlights, was the critical failure point. This is where it all went wrong. Utterly wrong. They resorted to sweeping under the model's rug all unknown dynamics, all the messy, inconvenient details that couldn't be easily quantified or solved in those nice, clean, closed-form equations.
And the moment of absolute failure, the reduction that basically enabled the crash, was reducing everything, all those thousands of interacting risk variables.
Not to what?
One single, terrifyingly small number. The default correlation.
Just one number to represent all that complexity.
The progression, as Derman-Wilmott bitingly observed, went from the sublime, that elegant mathematical attempt to capture a vast global system, to the elegantly ridiculous.
Elegantly ridiculous is perfect. They took this one single parameter correlation, and that parameter became the absolute linchpin of global credit pricing. Trillions of dollars resting on it.
Think about the implication there. Default correlation. It measures how likely two different mortgages are to default at roughly the same time, right?
Right. And the model essentially assumed that if you had a diverse pool of mortgages, some in Arizona, some in Florida, some maybe in New York, their failures would be largely independent or only mildly linked.
The assumption was, if a software engineer in Seattle defaults on their mortgage, it probably wouldn't directly cause a factory worker in Michigan to default. They're separate events.
That was the assumption. Low correlation across diverse pools. But the crucial point the model completely failed to capture was the difference between exogenous risk and endogenous risk.
Explain that distinction. That sounds critical.
It's the heart of the critique. Exogenous risk is external, independent. Think of a hurricane hitting Florida. That causes localized default, sure. But if you have mortgages diversified outside Florida, the correlation remains low and your model basically works as intended.
Okay, external shock.
Endogenous risk, however, is shared, systemic risk created by the system itself. It comes from within. What the model totally missed was the possibility of a global liquidity squeeze.
Something affecting everyone.
Exactly. When housing prices started falling everywhere, banks suddenly stopped lending to each other, credit froze up entirely, and the global economy basically suffered a systemic seizure.
And that seizure wasn't localized.
No. This seizure, the loss of liquidity, was the single shared, unmodeled variable that caused everyone to get into trouble simultaneously, regardless of where they lived or what job they had. Suddenly, everyone was correlated.
So the correlation, which the model assumed was small based on historical data from calmer times,
instantaneously went to 100%, or near enough. Everything failed together.
And the trader, meanwhile, would input a low correlation number based on that, outdated historical data from a period of stability.
Oh, yeah, looking backwards.
And the elegant model would obligingly spit out a high, seemingly safe valuation for those senior CDO tranches.
creating a perfect illusion of precision and safety.
while entirely masking the immense, unmodeled systemic risk just lurking beneath the surface. And the model actually encouraged the trader to trust the output over their own gut feeling or common sense.
Which brings us to the manifesto's broader critique of relying too heavily on statistics in finance. Statistics, they argue, provides only a shallow description.
What does that mean, shallow description?
It can tell you what happened in the past. Historically, the default correlation between these types of loans was 15%. Okay, fine. But physics, or any deep causal understanding, seeks deeper cause and effect.
Right. Why things happen.
Statistics alone cannot tell you the causal chain, the sequence of falling house prices, leading to mortgage defaults, leading to bank losses, leading to a credit freeze, leading to cascading job losses, leading to further defaults, that whole interconnected downward spiral. It can't predict how that chain reaction will cause the correlation to spike from 15% to nearly 100%.
So if you rely purely on historical statistics, you're basically assuming the future collapse will look exactly like past wobbles, or worse. You're assuming the environment will just remain stable indefinitely.
Which it never does in finance.
So, the math itself wasn't necessarily the enemy. It was the intellectual overreach, believing that statistical summaries could somehow substitute for understanding the underlying causal dynamics.
Absolutely. The map is not the territory, and the historical average is not the future crisis mechanism. However, and this is important, the authors are clear. Math isn't useless. They aren't Luddites smashing the calculator.
Okay, so what's the good use case?
They reiterate the positive use case we touched on earlier. Models are valuable precisely because they act as intuition transformers.
Right.
The human mind, my mind, your mind, struggles to intuitively estimate the precise current dollar value of a super complex CDO tranche. It's just too many moving parts.
Yeah, impossible.
But it is much easier for a human, especially an experienced trader or analyst, to have an intuitive guess, or at least an educated guess, about the likely range of future housing price movements or the potential for system-wide default rates to rise under stress.
Okay, you can have a feeling about the inputs.
Exactly. The model takes that input intuition, processes it rigorously through its equations, and provides a current actionable security price based on those assumptions. The utility is in processing the intuition, not replacing it.
So the final output number is only ever as good as the human judgment that went into estimating that crucial input, like the default correlation parameter.
Precisely. And if you forget that, if you start to believe the model's output is absolute truth derived from pure math,
You've done two dangerous things.
right. First, you've severed the necessary link to common sense and real-world observation. And second, worse, you've created this incredibly dangerous, brittle system based on the idolatry we discussed earlier. You've built your house on sand, believing it was rock.
It leads right back to that central point. Success in modeling is less about the sophistication of the calculus and much more about the quality and honesty of the assumptions, the input that comes from human judgment and intuition.
That's the crux of it. Garbage in, gospel out leads to disaster.
We established that models failed, partly because they chased this unattainable physics-like certainty and ignored the messy, human, adaptive reality of the markets. That raises a really crucial question. Where did the modelers learn to prioritize this mathematical elegance over, say, practical utility and robustness?
Oh, good question.
In Section 3, Derman and Wilmott take a direct swing at the academic establishment that trained them, arguing that these flaws are actually baked into finance education itself.
Yes, the critique of finance education is profoundly institutional. It's systemic. The authors paint this picture of business school textbooks built upon stilts of mathematical axioms supporting a house of numbered theorems, lemmas, and results.
This is very formal, very rigorous.
Exactly. This structure, they argue, is deliberately designed to mimic the intellectual rigor of pure mathematics or theoretical physics. The whole presentation suggests that financial theory proceeds logically, inevitably, from a set of universal truths like geometry.
But the truth is, as they keep stressing, the subject is at bottom dealing with people and money. It's fundamentally social.
Absolutely. The human element, the messy, irrational, emotional, and social context of money, risk, fear, greed. It's systematically stripped out in favor of mathematical neatness and tractability.
And the academic incentive structure kind of drives this, doesn't it?
It really does. Think about the professional incentive for a young professor aiming for tenure or trying to publish in a top-tier academic journal. What gets published?
It's a fancy math.
Yeah. Novel, mathematically complex, maybe closed-form solutions models that offer these elegant-looking answers to difficult, messy problems. Empirical work that honestly acknowledges human irrationality or complex, nonlinear feedback loops that often gets rejected for lacking sufficient mathematical rigor.
So it fosters an environment where the math itself becomes the main subject, rather than just being a tool to describe a messy reality.
Precisely. The mathematical trap is set. Elegance trumps reality because elegance gets rewarded.
And they argue that this whole pursuit of mathematical rigor is fundamentally misplaced in finance. It should be obvious, they argue, that every single financial axiom-like, perfectly rational actors or perfectly efficient markets is at least partially wrong.
Or only true under very specific, highly limited conditions that rarely hold in the real world.
Right. Their firm declaration is that finance can never in its wildest dreams be Euclid.
And that's such a great line. Euclid dealt with fundamental, unchanging geometric truth. The angles of a triangle will always sum to 180 degrees yesterday, today, forever. It's fixed.
But finance?
Finance deals with a highly dynamic, self-aware system that literally changes its own rules as it goes along, often in response to the models trying to describe it. This brings us straight to Aristotle's wisdom, which the authors invoke directly.
What did Aristotle say?
He said, basically, that different endeavors require different degrees of precision. You don't use quantum physics to bake a cake, right?
No, use a recipe.
Exactly. And the great weakness of finance, according to Derman-Wilmott, is its dark secret love of mathematical elegance and too much exactitude. We demand, or pretend to have, precision where precision is fundamentally impossible and even inappropriate because the system is fluid, behavioral, adaptive.
And this demand for inappropriate precision, for elegance above all else, is what forces the modeler to commit a kind of intellectual violence against the financial reality they're trying to capture.
Yes. Which brings us back to that wonderful literary comparison, the Cinderella analogy.
Ah, right. The slipper.
We are trying to force the ugly stepsister's foot into Cinderella's pretty glass slipper. It just doesn't fit naturally.
What do?
You have to start cutting off some essential parts to make it fit into the elegant model.
And what were the essential parts being cut off, specifically in the crisis models?
Well, precisely the risks that actually ended up causing the systemic failure. Things like liquidity risk, the very real risk that you wouldn't be able to sell your assets quickly without crashing the price because everyone else is trying to sell too. That got cut off.
Hell.
Counterparty risk, the risk that the institution on the other side of your trade might just default and disappear, creating a domino effect that was often minimized or ignored.
And human behavior.
Behavioral bias, absolutely. The fact that human traders and investors, when faced with genuine panic, don't act rationally and independently. They act uniformly, herd-like, and often irrationally, causing correlations to spike unexpectedly. These crucial real-world elements are hard to model elegantly.
So they get deleted, swept under the rug for the sake of a clean mathematical solution.
And the ultimate devastating effect of this deletion is that the models inevitably mask the true risk rather than exposing it.
Right. The clean, elegant model output gives the user, the trader, the risk manager, the regulator, a completely false sense of security.
It convinces them that this incredibly volatile system of human behavior, leverage, and interconnectedness is somehow understood, contained, and mathematically tamed, when it absolutely isn't.
Which is why the manifesto insists so powerfully that the most important question you must ask about any financial model, or really any complex quantitative system, isn't how right is it?
That's the wrong question entirely. Seductive, but wrong.
The right question is how wrong it is likely to be and how useful it is despite its assumptions.
That is such a fundamental shift in perspective, isn't it? It moves the modeler and the user away from this futile search for absolute truth, for the perfect model.
Towards what?
Towards the practical acknowledgement of utility, always tempered by deep humility. You are no longer trying to prove the model is universally correct because it never will be. You are instead trying to rigorously define its boundaries, its limitations, and its inevitable weaknesses. Where will it fail?
And that acknowledgement is crucial, because Derman and Wilmott completely burst the final academic bubble. The hope that, maybe one day with enough data and computing power, we will eventually find the right model for the market.
Yeah, that dream dies hard. They assert there is no single right model, fundamentally, because the world changes in response to the very models we use.
Explain that feedback loop again.
Successful models identify inefficiencies or patterns. Traders exploit those patterns using the model. That exploitation changes market behavior, eliminates the original inefficiency, and incentivizes new, different kinds of risks that the original model never accounted for. The model helps create the conditions for its own obsolescence.
So if that's the case, then any progress in financial modeling is inherently fleeting and temporary.
Exactly. The model that worked perfectly yesterday generates a market structure today that might render that same model completely obsolete, even dangerous tomorrow.
Which is why simplicity and transparency become paramount, right? Because you need to be able to understand the model's limitations quickly and clearly when the world inevitably changes and the model starts to break down.
You need to see the assumptions easily. You need to know what dirt was swept away. Complexity and opacity become enemies of safety in a changing world.
Okay, we've focused heavily on what a bad model looks like. Opaque, pretending to be overly precise, mathematically elegant perhaps, but fundamentally divorced from reality. Now, let's pivot and look at the gold standard Derman and Wilmott hold up in Section 4. What do they consider the model for models?
Surprisingly, perhaps, the choice is the Black-Scholes model for options valuation.
Black-Scholes. But that's often criticized too, isn't it? For its unrealistic assumptions.
It is. And Black-Scholes, now often unjustly maligned, as they say, by critics who only see its unrealistic assumptions, is championed in the manifesto precisely because of its structural integrity and its profound transparency. It is the model for models, not because it's perfectly accurate in predicting prices, it isn't always, but because it is based on true engineering principles and is remarkably robust in practice.
Let's tackle the core criticism head-on first, though. Everyone knows the basic Black-Scholes assumptions are technically untrue in the real world. Markets aren't perfectly continuous, volatility isn't constant, interest rates don't stay fixed forever, no transaction costs, the list goes on.
Right. Those are the standard critiques.
So why is Black-Scholes' acknowledged wrongness somehow acceptable, even laudable, yet the CDO model's hidden wrongness was catastrophic? Isn't that a bit of, I don't know, intellectual hypocrisy?
That's the absolutely critical challenge, and the answer lies, fundamentally, in clarity and purpose. Black-Scholes clearly defines its ideal, dirt-free circumstances. It's completely explicit about the simplified world it assumes.
Okay, transparency.
Crucially, Black-Scholes isn't just a passive valuation formula. It actively shows you, mathematically, how you could theoretically manufacture an option out of stocks and bonds through a process of continuous dynamic hedging, assuming that ideal world exists.
Ah, the manufacturing or replication argument. That's key.
It's brilliant for understanding its real value. The model's core purpose isn't prediction, it's replication.
Right.
They compare it to calculating the price of a can of fruit salad. You don't need some chaotic, probabilistic model of global consumer demand or long-term weather patterns affecting fruit harvests.
Pretty neat.
You just need to calculate the component costs right now. The current cost of the fruit, the sugar, the can, the factory labor, the transportation. Black-Scholes, similarly, defines the cost of the components, the stocks and bonds needed for hedging required to replicate the option's final payout in that ideal, friction-free world.
And it boils those component costs down, essentially,
Sure.
based on one key variable that needs to be estimated or observed.
It's exactly volatility. The model tells you how the option price should relate to the underlying stock price and its expected wiggle factor.
Okay, contrast that with the CDO model again. That didn't replicate risk in the same way.
No. The CDO model masked the true, unhedgeable systemic risk behind that single correlation number. Black-Scholes, by contrast, gives you a clear, albeit idealized, recipe for construction.
And because it is so clear about its ideal world, its assumptions, it achieves the second really crucial characteristic they highlight.
Which is robustness. Black-Scholes is robust in practice because the model allows an intelligent trader to qualitatively adjust for the inevitable mismatches between the ideal Black-Scholes world and the messy real world we actually live in.
So the trader doesn't just blindly accept the Black-Scholes price as the truth.
Absolutely not. A smart trader uses the model as a benchmark, as a framework for thinking.
So a good model doesn't just tell me the answer. It tells me what the market thinks the answer should be, based on certain assumptions, and maybe highlights where those market assumptions might be breaking down or seem extreme.
Exactly right. Traders use the Black-Scholes framework constantly, but often they focus less on the price output and more on the input required to get the current market price, the implied volatility.
Implied volatility. Break that down.
Implied volatility is the level of volatility you need to plug into the Black-Scholes formula to make the formula's theoretical price match the option's actual current market price.
Okay, so it works backwards from the market price.
Precisely. If the market is trading a particular option at a very high price compared to the model's prediction with normal volatility, it means the implied volatility is high.
And what does that tell the trader?
The trader sees that high implied volatility number and understands, okay, the market is expressing fear, or it's expecting unusually large price movements, or there's high demand for insurance. The implied volatility becomes a kind of market sentiment gauge, a measure of perceived risk or expectation, not necessarily a literal prediction of future statistical variance.
So the model acts as a transparent translator of market sentiment, framed within those idealized assumptions.
Yes. And the manifesto really emphasizes that transparency. You know what you are assuming when you use the model, they write, and you know exactly what has been swept out of view.
You know the dirt.
You know the dirt. The user of Black-Scholes knows perfectly well that they are ignoring transaction costs and assuming constant volatility and continuous trading. They can then use their human intuition, their market experience, to decide if those emissions are likely to be important right now, given current market conditions.
The dirt is visible and acknowledged, rather than being hidden away by layers and layers of complex, opaque calculus like it was in the worst of the CDO models.
Exactly. That visibility is key to responsible use.
So the synthesis here is that building truly useful, robust quantitative systems requires combining the qualitative and the quantitative. It needs imagination and observation. It's part art and part science. The model is, in essence, a highly efficient calculator for processing and structuring human intuition, not a replacement for it. And for that calculator to be safe and useful, it really must be simple and transparent enough for the user to understand its limitations.
Simplicity and transparency are the absolute best defense against self-delusion and model idolatry. When models become overly complex, opaque, mathematically intricate just for intricacy's sake,
They hide their flaws.
they hide their flaws, they hide the dirt, and they transform very quickly from helpful tools into objects of dangerous, uncritical worship.
This brings us logically to the final, and perhaps most actionable, section of the manifesto, the bit that lays out the non-negotiable ethical and practical rules for anyone creating or using these complex quantitative systems. We are now at the modeler's Hippocratic Oath.
Yes, the oath. This is the central moral counterargument to the kind of intellectual arrogance and carelessness that fueled the 2007 crisis. It begins by just restating that core mandate. Confusing the model with the world is embracing disaster, and it's driven by the false belief that humans somehow obey neat mathematical rules.
So the oath is essentially a mandate for perpetual humility and transparency.
That's it, exactly. Humility and transparency.
Okay, let's break down these mandates, these commandments for modelers. The first point seems to draw an absolute boundary between the creator and the created,
Yeah.
the modeler and the market reality.
1. Humility. I will remember that I didn't make the world and it doesn't satisfy my equations. This is just a profound mandate to keep the ego of the mathematician, the physicist, the coder firmly in check.
Don't get high on your own supply.
Exactly. The modeler must always treat the market as an independent, dynamic, often frustratingly irrational entity. The mere existence of a beautiful, elegant equation on your screen does not mean the world is somehow obligated to adhere to it.
The market doesn't care about your beautiful math.
Not one bit. The market is not beholden to the laws of mathematics discovered in some air-conditioned office. This point forces constant reality checks, ensuring the model remains subordinate to empirical observation and common sense.
The second point deals with the proper attitude toward the very tools of the trade mathematics itself. It's about leveraging the power of math without becoming, blinded by its apparent precision.
2. Skepticism. Though I will use models boldly to estimate value, I will not be overly impressed by mathematics. Boldly is important. It means applying the tools, pushing the frontier, innovating with new valuation techniques. Don't be afraid to use the math. But not overly impressed is the crucial defense against idolatry. The model is just a high-speed calculator processing your input assumptions. A mathematically stunning calculation derived from flawed, brittle, or non-robust assumptions is still fundamentally useless, if not actively dangerous.
Right. The elegance doesn't save you if the foundations are weak.
Not at all. It encourages critical thinking about the inputs, the assumptions, the context, not blind awe at the complexity of the processing itself.
This directly counters that aesthetic temptation they criticized in academia, that powerful allure of mathematical elegance for its own sake. Which brings us neatly to point 3, the mandate for transparency regarding those necessary trade-offs.
3. Transparency and trade-offs. I will never sacrifice reality for elegance without explaining why I have done so. This is the active mandate to make the dirt visible. It's not enough to just know the dirt is there.
Have to label it?
You have to label it clearly. If a modeler decides to ignore the friction of transaction costs or the catastrophic tail risk of a liquidity freeze simply in order to achieve a beautiful, analytically tractable, closed-form solution, they must explicitly flag that omission and its potential consequences.
So the sacrifice might be acceptable, but only if the user is fully aware of what has been omitted and understands the potential impact.
Exactly. The 2007 crisis happened, in large part because elegant models had their vital omissions obscured, buried deep in highly technical documentation that almost no one read, let alone understood.
The fourth point is about honesty and direct communication with the people actually using the model, the traders, the risk managers, maybe the policymakers. It seems to directly address the CDO failure, where risk was masked by that false sense of precision.
4. Honesty about risk. Nor will I give the people who use my model false comfort about its accuracy. Instead, I will make explicit its assumptions and oversights. The modeler's primary duty here is fundamentally to warn, not just to reassure.
Don't just give the nice answer.
No. The model documentation, the user interface, whatever it is, must explicitly provide the user with the tools to understand where and under what conditions the model is likely to break down.
Like a warning label.
A detailed warning label. If the model assumes, say, a 15% default correlation, the oversight documentation must clearly state something like, warning. If nationwide unemployment spikes above 8% and interbank lending freezes, this valuation is likely significantly underestimated, potentially by X magnitude, due to the unmodeled systemic liquidity risk not captured by the correlation input.
That shifts the responsibility for comprehensive risk management back to the human user, where it ultimately belongs.
It has to belong there. It's the difference between providing a single, comforting number and providing a range of potential outcomes, coupled with a detailed, understandable breakdown of the critical scenarios that could render that single number completely meaningless.
So the goal is to provide intelligent data that actively supports and informs human intuition.
Not absolute data that replaces critical thinking and responsibility. It forces the human user to engage, to think critically about the model's inherent limitations, rather than just treating the model as some kind of infallible black box oracle.
And finally, the fifth point. This one seems to address the profound scope, the sheer scale of their work. This is the moment they step back and recognize that financial modeling isn't just some abstract exercise in numbers.
Oh, it shapes the real world.
It actively shapes global society and economic infrastructure.
5. Societal impact. I understand that my work may have enormous effects on society and the economy, many of them beyond my comprehension. This is perhaps the most sobering and wide-ranging element of the oath. It's the acknowledgement that the models they build aren't isolated things.
They're interconnected.
Highly interconnected, contributing to a vast, complex, global financial infrastructure. And that second, third, and fourth order effects, like the freezing of global credit markets impacting small businesses, or the cascading failure of insurance companies threatening retirements, are often entirely outside the domain and comprehension of the original model itself.
It's a mandate for ultimate professional responsibility.
And a deep recognition of the inherent limits of prediction in highly complex, highly leveraged, interconnected systems. You can't possibly foresee all the ripple effects.
Wow. If we look back at the 2007 crisis through the lens of this oath, it's painfully clear that the modelers, and perhaps more importantly the institutions they worked for, failed on nearly every single point.
It really looks that way, doesn't it?
They confused their models with the world. They were overly impressed by the elegance of their mathematics. They absolutely sacrificed reality for that elegance without explicit, understandable transparency. They definitely gave false comfort about accuracy. And they almost entirely failed to comprehend the catastrophic societal impact of their interconnected fragile systems until it was far too late.
The terrible irony is that the relentless pursuit of mathematical perfection and precision led not to safety and stability, but to profound systemic fragility.
Because the search for that precise elegance actively removed the necessary guardrails of human intuition, skepticism, and common sense.
It crowded them out.
So what does this all mean for us today? We live in a world increasingly dominated by AI. by machine learning, where complexity is exploding rather than contracting. What's the takeaway?
Well, we started with the failures of the 2007 crisis, where excessive complexity, opacity, and a kind of intellectual arrogance led straight to systemic disaster.
We traveled through the flawed intellectual foundations, that mistaken emulation of physics, and we examined a specific catastrophic failure, the CDO model, which reduced terrifying complexity to a single, easily manipulated, ultimately meaningless number.
But then we found our positive benchmark, our model for models in Black schools. Not because it's perfect, but because its virtues are clarity, transparency, and a robustness that actively supports, rather than seeks to supplant, human intuition.
So the core insight of the manifesto, which really seems to transcend finance and apply to almost any complex quantitative domain today,
AI, climate modeling, epidemiology.
is that simplicity and clarity in models are paradoxically the best way to leverage human intuition effectively without falling into self-delusion.
It's about knowing exactly what dirt has been swept under the rug and being brutally honest upfront about the likely margin of error and the model's breaking points. Finance, unlike physics, requires an aesthetic of practical usefulness and transparent clarity, not an aesthetic of universal, immutable truth.
The model is merely an artifice, a tool.
And we must never attempt to breathe independent life into it or worship it. The math is a powerful tool, but it's not a deity.
This brings us back then to the final, really provocative thought that emerges directly from Derman-Wilmott's own warning about the very nature of progress in this field. They wrote, "Remember that progress in financial modeling is fleeting and temporary. Markets change and newer models become necessary."
Right, the models themselves change the game.
So if markets change in response to the models we use, meaning a successful model alters the behavior of the participants, which eventually optimizes the system to the point of rigidity and fragility, making it vulnerable to a new kind of shock.
Then, using a successful model means you are constantly, inevitably, optimizing for the past. The model's success contains the seeds of its own future failure.
Because the system adapts to your model, meaning your model is now describing yesterday's reality, not tomorrow's potential crisis.
Exactly.
How then does one build a quantitative system, whether it's a sophisticated trading algorithm, a complex risk management system, or perhaps even a large language model making societal predictions, that anticipates, or at least allows for, the inevitable moment when the model itself and the market or social structures it helped create breaks the very system it attempts to describe?
That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it?
How do we build systems that genuinely integrate and perhaps even demand human intuition and oversight, rather than subtly encouraging our common sense and skepticism to atrophy over time? This feels like the fundamental, enduring challenge left for you, the learner, to explore as quantitative systems become ever more powerful, complex, and deeply interconnected in our world.
It's a critical question for anyone relying on or building algorithmic decision-making systems today. The profound humility embedded in Derman and Wilmott's manifesto remains just as relevant now, maybe even more so than it was in the immediate raw aftermath of the 2008 crisis.
Indeed. A timeless warning. We've reached the end of this deep dive. Thank you for joining us.